Solar City program, a new retrofit pilot program, and the municipal electric vehicle strategy. In addition, Kevin is the technical expert, supporting the implementation of HalifACT, the municipality's environmental action plan that aims to reduce community-wide emissions by 75% over the 2016 emissions and achieve net zero by 2050. Kevin uses his experience and passion for clean energy to educate and lead the community in reducing their carbon footprint. So welcome, Kevin.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Thanks, everyone. And also with me today is the folks from the Clean Foundation's Next Stride. So Brendan and Evan, they're going to just be over there for afterwards. They also have a Chevy Bolt outside that if folks are interested in test driving it, they can take it for a spin. We also have an electric van that is all decked out in Halifax decor, just to kind of promote our transition to our fully electric fleet as well. And Brendan is also going to join us about halfway through today to give sort of a 101 on electric vehicles and answer all your questions. I was going to talk about it, but he's the expert, so I was just going to copy his slides. So I figured why not let him do it. So yeah, thanks a ton for having me here. This is super exciting. As Ellen said, my name is Kevin Boutilier. I'm the manager of Clean Energy. It used to be Community Energy, now it's Clean Energy. And our team works on all things mitigation for our climate action plan, HalifACT. So today, in probably the first hour or so, I'm going to go through some climate change, 101, climate impacts in Halifax itself, how it's impacting all of us, our climate plan, and what we are trying to do as a municipality, but also as a community to respond. And then I'll go into just a couple of mitigation actions that we can all take, things that we're trying to promote just through Halifax in general. So awesome. So my team works in the environment and climate change team of the Halifax Regional Municipality. So folks that might not be familiar with the Halifax Regional Municipality, I'm sure most are, but it is made up of, the area from Ecum all the way down to Hubbard's, all the way out to the airport. It actually makes up quite a vast area of Nova Scotia. It's about half the population. And with municipalities, like we are the folks that are really in the front lines. So we are the ones usually working day to day with the property owners and the residents. So we own about 60% of the infrastructure that you all see. So the roads, transit, community centers, fire stations, police, and so forth. Garbage collection, that is all done through the municipality. Since 2020-ish, the environment and climate change team was formed. When I started with the municipality in 2017, there was maybe 3 of us working on the climate file. Now there's well over 20, and our team, like I said, I work with the mitigation side of things, so things that are working towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But we also have a team that's dedicated on adaptation, which is a really big piece to the plan where, hey, we are just little Nova Scotia, and we are a coastal city. So not regardless, that's probably a bad way to say it, but even if we do mitigate all of our emissions, we are still going to see those climate impacts, right? So how can we better prepare our communities, our neighborhoods to withstand and bounce back faster? We also have a team that works on environmental protection, so things like watershed protection, contaminated site cleanup, lakes and so forth, and all that good fun stuff. So I wanted to start off though, so we do have a climate plan, and I'll get into why that climate plan is important and where that came from. But first, I just wanted to touch on essentially some climate basics that might be familiar to some, might not be for others. So I find like it's a good overview. So climate change and weather, I find that gets confused a lot, right? So weather itself it's raining today. It's cold out today. We had a snowstorm that came through. Like that is weather. It's short-term changes in the atmosphere where it can vary day to day. Nova Scotia, like is the best example of that, right? Because it could be raining in the morning, I could be at the beach in the afternoon, right? So that is weather. Climate change is that long-term trend, right? So it's looking at, it is getting warmer over time. We're getting more extreme hurricanes and storms, right? In the last, we had Dorian 3 years ago, Fiona last year. Hurricane 1 was a bit ago, but there's still more extreme storms. So it's essentially the change in what we are seeing on a long-term trend. I find a good example to visualize this is the stock market, right? I mean, Netflix today, it went up 4%. Tomorrow it went down 4%. Over time, maybe Netflix is a bad example because I think that's essentially going down. But generally, the stock market over time does go up, right? So that is a good way to think about climate versus weather, right? We could have a negative 20 degrees one day, but the overall trend is increasing temperatures. Climate change, though, with those increasing temperatures, there are going to be more extreme weather impacts. So specific to Halifax and Nova Scotia, this can be coastal flooding, erosion, extreme heat events over the summer, drought, wildfires. We've all seen the devastation over the summer. Extreme floods, something again that we saw over the summer, and more hurricanes and large weather events. Another one too is that people don't often think about is when things do warm up, we're going to see a lot less freeze, more freeze thaw. So I don't know if people remember, I think it was about 2015, I was living in an apartment and it would rain and then it would freeze and then it would melt, rain, freeze, and there was vehicles that were like actually stuck in the ice and it was nonstop. And then that also increases the number of potholes. Everyone hates potholes. So there's that. So what is causing all this, this change in climate that then results in all these adverse climate impacts? Well, it's greenhouse gas emissions. So when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions, we're looking at carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. And these are all expelled into the atmosphere through burning, essentially in farming. So when you think of methane, you think of cows. When you think of nitrous oxide, things like waste facilities, chemical fertilizers, but primarily it is through the burning of fossil fuels. That's where we get over 70% of our emissions is through the burning of fossil fuels, and that's through things like driving our vehicles, generating our electricity, heating our homes, and so forth. So why are we warming? So greenhouse gas emissions are actually a good thing. Naturally, the atmosphere, we need it to regulate temperature. Otherwise, we would get much too cold and we would all freeze out, and that would not be fun for anyone. And yes, the climate has been changing through eons, mostly due to the shift in the Earth's orbit over millennia. However, since the Industrial Revolution, due to the burning of fossil fuels, we are increasing temperatures at a very rapid rate. And you could listen to me talk, or we could listen to Kristen Bell tell us some more about why we are warming. Da, 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 da.
Why is the world warming up? Let's think of Earth for just a moment as a greenhouse. Every second, a huge amount of energy smashes into our greenhouse. Our atmosphere, the glass roof and walls, reflects some of that energy, but most of it passes right through and heats everything up. Much of that heat used to escape back into space, keeping us at a stable, warm temperature. But then something changed. Humans began to spew enough carbon dioxide to fill billions of greenhouses each day. What does all that greenhouse gas do? It makes the glass of our greenhouse thicker. Thicker glass means heat escapes into space much more slowly. And don't forget, energy from the sun is still streaming in just as quickly as before. The result is a planet with temperatures too hot for our liking and, eventually, living.
Any questions? And for questions, feel free to just jump in. We don't need to stop at any particular spot. We can just jump in and have a grand old conversation. So essentially, more emissions, warmer Earth, more extreme climate impacts, reduce GHGs, keep the temperature as is ideally. And the climate impacts will not be as severe as the significant impacts onto our infrastructure and our homes. There's some folks on our team that are working with the planners and the province to try and implement the Coastal Protection Act, which has been long overdue, which would essentially have some rules and regulations for how close we can build to the coast. So that is a way to protect folks against future losses and protect our infrastructure. But we have a choice. All that grim, all that, sadness, but we have a choice as a society. So what we do today will impact how things look in the future. So just to recap, if we look at greenhouse gas emissions, we emit more and more and more. It's going to increase the climate impacts that we see for the community. However, if we do reduce or stop emitting those greenhouse gas emissions, we can actually slow down the impacts. So like I said, we have a choice. So the bottom line here is that 1.5 degree pathway. Of those who are not familiar with that pathway, climate scientists say, hey, we need to do everything we can to keep things at that 1.5 degrees of global warming. Anything beyond that, we start to get some very extreme impacts in sort of climate impacts. So the next, say, probably 6, 7, or 8 years are significantly important. So we don't essentially have thermal runaway, and we go up to that 4.5 degrees, which would be irreversible and very intense climate impacts. A good example of this is if you are going to the dentist, right? So, you leave your dentist, you just had your annual checkup and they said, oh, okay, your teeth are doing okay, floss and do a great job. And then you won't have a cavity next year. You don't do anything, you're going to have a cavity next year. If also you wait until 1 month before you go back to the dentist or a week before you go back to the dentist and you start brushing away, right? You're too far gone. It's not going to reverse the impacts. So the next 6 years is very critical for us in Nova Scotia, us as a society to, really try and turn that faucet off, rein back those impacts, and ensure that the future that, that we leave people, us as well, is not a burden on those folks. So these people will do a much better job than I explaining why 1.5 degrees matter. Oh, okay, now it's gonna work.
Why is 1.5 degrees such a big deal? Because to warm our entire planet up by 1.5 degrees Celsius requires a lot of heat. All this extra heat melts glaciers, which raise sea levels. If the ice sheets of Antarctica and Greenland melt completely, millions of people's homes will be underwater. The extra heat also intensifies weather, making wet places wetter, dry places drier, and increasing the ferocity of storms. That 1.5 degree increase also won't be distributed evenly. The coldest nights in the Arctic might get 10 degrees warmer. The warmest days in Mumbai might get 5 degrees hotter. Over the past 10,000 years, we've been lucky. Earth's climate was stable, and our civilizations flourished. But as our climate gets more unstable, so will our economies and our societies. We'll all suffer, and the vulnerable will be hit hardest, unless we act now.
But it's not all doom and gloom. Not to say that, our plan is going to fix everything, but as a municipal government, in 2020, we did develop and there's another video, but I'll get you to that in a second. Yeah. Oh, I think I'm messing it up because I keep going to different videos. But we do have a climate action plan called HalifACT. If you want to just go back one. It was developed in 2020 and it was in response to that need to stay within that 5-degree pathway. So we hired a consultant to essentially throw all the things at the wall and say, hey, if we want to do our part to mitigate climate change, what do we need to do? That plan came up with 46 actions that are to be completed by both the municipality and the community to do our part to mitigate, but also to adapt to climate change. The ACT is acting on climate together because it is a collective it's a collective goal and it's a collective action that needs to be taken. The targets that we have in the climate plan to stay within that 1.5-degree pathway is a 75% community emission reduction over 2016 levels, and fully net zero by 2050. And to show leadership, we have committed to net zero municipal operations by 2030. So municipal operations, that is all of our corporate buildings. So that looks at our community centers, our fire stations, our police stations, our fleet, so decarbonizing our light duty fleet, our snow plows, which will be tough at some point, our Halifax Transit, and also looking at our solid waste and trying to decarbonize that as best we can. There's another good video too that my boss made, and she'll yell at me if I don't show it. So let's watch that too. Okay, so it's that YouTube video. Yeah, that's it.
Climate change is already affecting us here in Halifax. The question is, what kind of a future Halifax do we want to live in? HalifACT is the name we've given to our city's collective response to the climate crisis. Created with the help of many stakeholders, HalifACT provides a roadmap to shift how we use energy, how we move people and goods, and how we build for the future. It defines what we need to do to safeguard against future climate impacts like extreme weather and sea level rise, and it calls for leadership by everyone. In fact, the ACT in HalifACT stands for Acting on Climate Together, which we need to do in new and creative ways. We have a narrowing window of time to turn the challenge of climate change into an opportunity that results in healthier, more equitable, and vibrant communities. Learn more at halifax.ca/climate and join the HalifACT movement.
So within that plan, there is adaptation actions and mitigation actions. I work on the mitigation side, so I'm not going to talk much about the adaptation side of things. But this wedge diagram, it shows where we need to focus our efforts in mitigation. So the biggest thing is retrofitting existing buildings. There's a significant amount of work to be done. We have a very old building stock here in Halifax and Nova Scotia. So to work on that, we have developed a navigator pilot program is what we're calling it. We're currently just in the early stages of that, but we've chatted with, folks like yourselves, figure out like, hey, people want to reduce their energy consumption. They want to save money, but they don't really know where to start or where to go. So what we've developed is what we're calling a navigator, which is essentially a project manager that we're offering to residents that will guide them from the start to the finish of that deep energy retrofit. Really try and, reduce how scary it sounds, the complexity of it. So people typically will get a home energy assessment with officials in Nova Scotia, and that will say you need to do put solar on your roof and swap out your fuel system to fully electric, put it in a heat pump, add some insulation, and people are, really keen to do that, but they don't know where to start. So what we're doing is offering that individual to help them get quotations, make sure they're getting all the rebates that they are eligible for, the different financing options, and providing that oversight so that the deep energy retrofit is done properly and safely, and that you'll see the savings that you're expecting to see. When it comes to rooftop solar, we do have a solar city program, and I actually have a whole section about that because I like solar the most. So I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Large scale renewables. So our grid is quite dirty. We produce our electricity through a fair bit of coal and other fossil fuels. So what we need to do is look at other ways to decarbonize that electricity generation. So we have the Sackville landfill, which is just off Highway 101. It has been decommissioned since 1996, and it's an otherwise useless piece of land. So we did do a study for a large-scale solar farm, and we're hoping to move forward with that so that people in apartment buildings, people that may not own their home, or they have a home and their home is not suitable for solar, they might be able to subscribe to some of those panels on that large solar farm to offset their electricity consumption. Net zero new buildings, that's a big one. This figure is actually out of date because when this was created in 2020, we did not see the forecasted growth that we've seen in the last couple of years. It's been exponential. But every building we build today is going to lock us in to operational carbon. So we do need to work hard, work with the province to ensure that all new buildings are built to a net zero standard. That's easier said than done. The municipality does not mandate the building code. That is passed down through the province. We are encouraging the province to go deeper and be more aggressive with the building code, but that is still ongoing. However, with our corporate buildings, we did pass an administrative order that mandates that all of our corporate buildings, so our community centers, our fire stations, and so forth, are built to a net zero standard. And finally, electrifying transportation. The folks at NextRide will talk more about that in a little bit. But as a municipality, we are looking to transition our light duty fleet to fully electric. We are electrifying our transit fleet, so public transit, and we're also looking to put public charging infrastructure out in the world so that when people are thinking, hey, it's time to swap to a new vehicle, maybe I'll think about electric vehicles because I see infrastructure out there that would help me get to where I need to go. Any questions? We're gonna skip this. No? Good? Yeah? Awesome. All right. You can just jump right in. If there's any questions you have, please feel free. Yeah, Brendan.
Is there a time expected for the electric transits to start rolling?
That's a very good question. So we've got 60 buses on order. Everyone blames supply chain, which is accurate, but we're hoping to get one electric bus by the end of this month, and then another handful in January. Yeah, so yeah.
I heard that you were going to electrify a ferry from Bedford to Halifax.
That's correct. So that is the plan. So we did do some analysis at the Mill Cove Ferry. We're looking to build a new ferry terminal there as part of our rapid transit initiative. We're gonna have one there, one in Shannon Park, and one at the bottom layer UTEC, all to downtown. The first one is Bedford Ferry, and we've asked the feds for some cash so that we can proceed with electrifying that facility. And well, it doesn't exist, but making sure it's net zero, and we have an electric ferry as well.
Pictures I saw on it where it was going to be a high friction conventional hub.
Oh, really?
A lot of water.
That sounds that's not good, because what I've seen, and maybe it was just pictures, but it was more like a catamaran, right? So yeah, hopefully someone's thought about that. So it's not a project I'm working on specifically, but I'll bring that up to them. But the analysis that they've done said that they should get from Bedford to downtown Halifax in 18 minutes. When you compare that with the bus and driving, especially in the morning, it's going to be, a much better idea, right? So yeah.
mentioned project management for individuals trying to reduce.
Mhm.
Is that through the efficiency Nova Scotia, or is the city offering something separate?
Right. Yeah, I was supposed to repeat the question, so my apologies. So the question was on the Navigator project management pilot that is being offered. Is that through Efficiency Nova Scotia or through others? So that's actually through the Halifax Regional Municipality. So we're in the pilot stage now, and we went to the home show last March and got some people to sign up that were interested in participating. And we only had enough room for 10, very small. It's maxed out. We're now in the process of determining, okay, how do we expand it? So we'll make a more public splash when that is, when we have the capacity to do so, because we'll want people to hop on board with that. Yeah, for sure. Yes.
Wait.
Oh, yeah.
I'm getting some heat pumps installed in December,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure that I'm getting all of the rebates. So when the Navigator's fully up, would it compensate me for what I've already spent?
Yeah, so so we're not actually offering any rebates. The Navigator itself would be more of a guide for the property owner. So what I would recommend in the interim, because you're gonna have your system installed before this program is launched, I would reach out to officials in Nova Scotia, and they're the ones that do administer the rebates, and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. What rebates are available for me. So that would be your best bet at this point. Yeah. And the EAC might be able to help you out too. Chris and his team will be fantastic on that. So awesome. So I put this little piece in here because a lot of the times I see some stuff floating around and be like, hey, we're just Halifax, we're just a little piece of the pie, right? And we look at China and India and Russia, and the carbon emissions in those areas are substantial, which is not inaccurate. That is actually quite accurate. However, we as a country, as a municipality, have the responsibility to act. And in 2020, we looked at we didn't look at it, but I took it from it. The greenhouse gas emissions emitted per capita, so essentially per person. And Canada is the second worst in the entire world. We are energy pigs. It's pretty brutal. You look at, others that are, half of us, right? Which is quite unfortunate. And all cities are not created equal. So most, in probably 99% of the cases, the folks that actually contribute the least amount to climate change are the ones that are suffering most. So this picture here is the city council in the Maldives, where this was in 2008, I believe it was, where they actually held their council meeting underwater because due to sea level rise, which is being exacerbated by more wealthy nations like Canada, the US, Saudi Arabia, they're actually going to be underwater. Their country is. So they've actually, we got some good stats here, but they've actually started purchasing land in Australia to plan for mass migration when their cities and whatnot are underwater. There's C40 is an organization that lists, kind of clumped all the cities, looked at all the different cities and municipalities across the world, and put them into 4 different categories. And they say that Canada, because we are a high GHG emitting per capita and a high GDP generation per capita, we have the responsibility to act fast in the short term, so that folks that do have a high emission per capita but a low GDP per capita, they have some time to catch up. Let us work out the technologies, work out the policies, so that others can follow suit and bring them along. I'll skip that one too. But why act now? Well, because it's going to cost us a crap ton of money if we do not act now. So the way we typically deal with climate change and disasters is we put the fires out, right? We're very, reactive, not proactive. There's been some studies that state that the economic impacts of Canada, I mean, it says right there, you're looking at $5 billion a year starting in 2020. That is not just a guess, because if you look at Hurricane Fiona, that was one of the the most costly in Atlantic Canada in terms of insurance claims, and within the top 10 across Canada of all time. And coastal communities, just like Atlantic Canada, have the highest adaptation costs in the country. A little case study over in Red River, Manitoba. They spent what they do? They invested $63 million on. Bear with me. I shall read this. To build the Manitoba Red River floodway in 1960, because it must have flooded all the time, and they had to mitigate that every single time. They'd have to react to that. But they've estimated that it saved about $8 billion since 1960 to 2008. And it is really tough to, I think, sell the adaptation, because you're avoiding something that's not going to happen, right? You put money into it, and it's tough to prove that business case. I find with mitigation, I'm saving money right away, right? But with adaptation, I think we all need to do a bit of a better job to outline the benefits of doing so. There is, significant ROI on mitigation as well. So our climate plan, it's going to cost a little bit of money up front, not a little bit, a lot of money up front. But by 2030, that's where we start to see the break even. And then from there on, we're going to see savings. So a lot of those savings come from reduction in electricity costs and energy costs. The cost of carbon is going to continue to go up, which is going to be passed on to each and every one of us. So there's going to be a cost associated with that. And there's also significant savings when it comes to your building with operation and maintenance as well. When you have a very airtight, efficient building, your electricity costs are going to be much less. They're much more predictable. You can spend that money on more fun things. There's also going to be an increase in job opportunity. So if we do actually, decarbonize our electricity grid, we start retrofitting our buildings and building all our new buildings to net zero, it's estimated to see about 90,000 person hours of employment, years of employment within the next 10 years. There's also significant social opportunity to doing all of these things. As I mentioned with the Maldives, it's typically the people that are most vulnerable that are being impacted the most. But there's also the reduction in energy poverty, which I think, we're all, in a way experiencing this in one way or another. But most recent study said that 45,000 homes in HRM are actually experiencing energy poverty. I know you folks had hopefully it's the same number as what the course, the class you took earlier. But essentially energy poverty is when you're spending a significant amount of your after-tax income on electricity, right? So I think it is, we have the social responsibility to ensure that, affordable housing providers and those with in low income, we focus our programs so it can really reach them where they're at, so that we can reduce their energy consumption, so that their month-to-month bills are more predictable and they can spend, things on like food and pleasure and so forth. So what can I do? I don't know if this is a good spot to stop. I got a bit more to go. So still have time? All right, we're still going to keep going. So I guess, does anyone, what can we do? Maybe talk to each other, shout it out. Anyone on the chat? Has anyone, thought of what they can do, might be able to do, want to do, have done? You've putting in heat pumps? Thumbs up. Solar panels is a great one too. Yeah. Anyone invested in solar panels or have seen neighbors, talked to neighbors that have invested? Yeah. Electric vehicles is a good one too. 100%. Yeah, exactly.
So you want to make sure you're putting your money.
Indeed. Yeah, for sure. Right on. Well, one of the things is solar energy. So I'm going to dig into solar energy. At my previous life, I worked at a private company in Burnside where we designed and installed solar energy. I hopped on with the city in 2017 where I ran the Solar City program. So I just like talking about solar. So let's talk about solar. Yeah. Solar is really important here in the Nova Scotia context because our grid is so dirty, right? When you think of a deep energy retrofit, you're installing heat pumps, you're getting rid of your fossil fuel heating space heater, and you are installing an electric space heater. But where does that electricity come from? It comes from Nova Scotia Power. You know, they're cleaning their grid. They've got some very, ambitious targets, but unfortunately today it is still, quite dirty. So we need to complement the deep energy retrofits with solar energy. So this is just a picture of a solar energy system that was installed. I like to show this because a lot of people are surprised about how many panels you're actually going to need on your roof. The average system is probably going to need about 20 to 30 of these panels here. They're about 50 pounds a piece, 3.5 by 4.5 feet. And you're essentially going to fill your roof up, and hopefully if you've done a deep energy retrofit on your home, it's going to produce everything that you need throughout the course of a year. Every single year these panels can generate more and more and more electricity within that same area, which is fantastic. But on average, each system in residential systems probably about 10 kilowatts. That 10 kilowatts is going to generate maybe 12,000 kilowatt hours per year. And again, depending on how much electricity consumption you use within your home, that could offset a good portion of it. Yes.
Has there been any real movement in the roof tiles that were designed a few years ago? Like, because we look at the big panels and we
Totally.
hear what you say.
Yeah.
But what about more forward moving so that
Yeah.
roof tiles would
So
be?
more integrated. So that's a really good question. When I was at my previous company, I think it was over 2016 when the Tesla roof tiles were like, they're coming out. They look fantastic. They never actually made it here. They never made it to Nova Scotia. I'm not convinced that they made it all too far in the States as well. Really, it has essentially been this product and that product only. I'd love to take a look at more of those. I find there could be issues in inefficiency because each of the roof tiles are so small. And how many points of failure could there be, right? They look really great, but I'm not 100% convinced on them, unfortunately. There is a company though that is looking at building integrated solar tiles. I believe SMU is recladding one of their dormitories, and they're actually looking at using it's similar to the roof tiles, and it's integrated. I don't know if the cost is a good buck, but yeah, something we'll definitely be looking into, right? Because I think it makes sense for someone to put solar on their roof. We typically say, hey, do your roof first, right? You don't want to put solar on and then in 5 years have to take the solar off because then you just lost all your savings. So this would be a great, do your roof once. That happens to be solar tiles as well. So yeah, that's a good question. Yes.
What crosses my mind is what happens in a hurricane?
That's a good question. So, so solar racking. So I've got some stuff to potentially pass around if people want to touch it. Who doesn't like touching stuff? So the solar panels themselves are mounted on this aluminum racking, and the aluminum racking is secured into your roof trusses through this L-foot, this L bracket, and I just, yeah, I take no liability. And these L feet are secured into your roof trusses that are typically spaced. You typically space them about 6 feet apart. And then you use this flashing to go up under the shingles to avoid any water penetration. So you're probably going to have on this system here, you've got 2 rails per row, so there was 6 rails, and you probably have maybe 12 points of connection into your roof. In Halifax, you do need an engineer to do a wind load analysis based on hurricane force winds, and sign off that the way that it's secured in the structure is safe. So if panels come off, then your roof is coming off too. So, but it is something that we definitely take a look at. When we're looking at flat roofs, so we do a fair bit of commercial, especially for our corporate buildings. It doesn't really make sense to secure them into the roof. So we do something called a ballasted system, where we place stones on the back of the panels just to hold them on the roof. And we need to do an analysis as well for that to make sure that that extreme storm comes through. It doesn't blow them off. So I believe.
How much weight does it add to the house, and what about effect on maintenance of the roof?
Totally, yeah. So it adds about 3 pounds per square foot, which is actually not significant. A lot of structural engineers have looked at it and say it's just the same as a bit of a snow load on it. When it comes to maintenance to the roof, that's a good question. People have said that it actually protects, I'll pass this out too. I don't know if anyone wants to touch that. It protects the roof from UV radiation, from wind, from water damage and stuff like that. So it actually should prolong the life of the roof. That's a great question too. So today, panels themselves, they have a guaranteed generation. Oh, and the question was, what is the life expectancy of the, yeah, I forgot about that. I said I was going to do that too. So the question was, what is the life expectancy of the panels? They all have a guaranteed generation warranty of 25 years. So they say they're not going to degrade by more than X% per year. After 25 years, they're probably producing about 80 some odd percent compared to what they were when they started. But that doesn't mean they just shut off. Typically, you're going to see a payback period in maybe 10 years. So, you know, these will be sticking around for a while after that payback period. I think we had another question here.
My husband and I have been looking at both EV cars as well as solar panels. And there's a lot of information out there. And of course, when you're making these purchases, you want to get the most up to date. What you had said is, you know, we really are in a time crunch. We should be trying to mitigate as fast as we can. But there's always a better car battery coming out, perhaps a better solar panel coming out. So what is your response to that when you're talking to people about, you know, making the leap or wait another year, they're getting better? Because even now with the solar panels, I heard there's one company, it's slightly different in terms of the way that the panels are. So I could go to them and maybe those ones are terrible because they actually don't have, you know, anything to back up history wise. So what would you say?
That's a good question. And I do get that because when I installed, when I was working at, so this panel here, I took it from NSCC when I was working at my previous company, and it has a capacity of 205 watts, which, you know, the more wattage, the better, right? When I installed my system in 2019, they were 395 watts. Today, the panel size is about 500 watts. So every year it's going to get better. 100%. How much better? It's not going to get that much better. You know, we've been able to perfect the science of these to you know, it's going to be a little bit more efficient. But what I say to people is I think you should, you know, just jump on it for the time being. The savings between my system and a system with a 500 watt isn't going to be significantly different. It's definitely not going to be enough to justify waiting a year or 2 years to add solar on. I would say you just do it now. Yeah.
There's a question in
the chat
online. Yes. The question is as follows. What would be the minimum amount of panels to make a noticeable difference in the electrical energy consumption?
So I think there might be two points to that question. To make a notice of the electrical consumption of your home, I would say minimum would probably be 15 to 20, but it's really going to depend on how much electricity that home uses, right? Is it a fully electric home, electric heat? Do you have heat pumps? Do you have an EV as well? My system on my roof saves me about $2,000 per year. And I'm completely, not off the grid. I'll get into that in a moment. But when it comes to reducing the carbon intensity of the overall Nova Scotia grid, you're going to need a lot of solar panels. I believe it's about maybe 1% of the Nova Scotia grid is now it's 1%. Oh yeah, good stuff. But distributed solar, which is solar on rooftops, is costly. So to get utility scale, you want to look at things, essentially like wind, offshore wind, onshore wind, to really get that dollar for a dollar per generation, as low as possible, so that the cost isn't passed on to us fine ratepayers, which it will be, but hopefully it's not as much. But for the typical residential building, 20 panels is probably the smallest you'd want to go. Just like anything, you buy it in quantity, the price per unit's going to go down. There's always a base cost. You've got your permits, you've got your racking, you've got inverters and so forth. So if you go below, 20 panels, you're going to have to start to see a higher per unit cost. Will that answer the question?
What happens to overproduction? If you have extra panels and you overproduce, I have some understanding that it automatically goes back to the grid.
Mm-hmm.
You get the benefit from that.
Right. So the question is, what happens when you overproduce and you don't actually consume the electricity that your panels are generating? I will get to that question. Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's the most common question I get. If you've got, so a lot of most systems are mounted on the roof, just because we do not have space on the ground. But if you are, beneficial enough and you've got a bunch of space, you have a farm or you're out in East Peswick or whatever, and you got some space, ground mount is a great option. Ground mount is super because you can make sure they're angled at the right angle, and you can orient them due so. So here in Nova Scotia, because you want year-round generation, you want it to be facing due south, and 30 degrees is actually ideal. And the reason why 30 degrees is ideal and not 45, a lot of people think 45 because that's an average throughout the course of a year. You want it to be perpendicular. You want your panels to be perpendicular to the sun. There's more solar radiation in the summer, so you want them perpendicular in the summer, which is a 30-degree tilt. Fun fact. So solar panels themselves, photons are going to hit them from the sun. It's going to jar loose some electrons. The electrons are going to come down to your inverter as DC power. The inverter is what takes that DC power, converts it to usable AC electricity, which is then used in the home. So everything we typically use today, you plug it into the wall, it's AC electricity. So there's 3 types of inverters, and I might get too deep into this, but there's typically 3 types of inverters. So there's a string inverter, microinverter, and a DC optimizer. So a string inverter, that's been around forever. It's sort of not old technology, but it's the older technology. And what a string inverter does is there's a suitcase shaped box that is in your electrical room. The panels are all connected in series, and then it comes down into the string inverter, which then converts all the panels at once to usable AC electricity. These systems are great when you have no potential for shading on your building. You don't have a tree in the east, or your slope is quite steep, so snow is not going to stay on it. Because the downside for string inverter systems is, since all of those panels are connected in series, if one panel is shaded, all the panels are shaded. Bum, bum, bum. I just put up my Christmas lights yesterday, and there was one light bulb out, so all the light bulbs were out. These string inverter systems are really good for flat roof systems, larger commercial installations. For residential, don't let anyone sell you on a string inverter system. Typically, they were cheaper. They're really not that much cheaper anymore. Your best bet, and this is what a string inverter system looks like, is to go with microinverters. I've got microinverters on my home. I think they're great. And what a microinverter does, I've got, some show and tell, which is super, is just a wee little inverter that actually goes on the back of each panel. And it converts the DC to AC independent of all the other panels. So I actually have no shading on my roof, but the bottom row of panels, sometimes snow will stick on it. So it's good to have microinverters because regardless of what the other panels are doing, one panel could even be broken and I can't get anyone in to fix it. All the rest of the panels will still produce, without issue. The downside of this is that all the electronics are located on the roof. So if you have an inverter issue with a string inverter, it's in my electrical room. It's right there. It's easy to access. In this case, it's up on the roof, so it does take a little bit more effort. And that's the microinverter, which you all have in your hand there. Yes, question.
So speaking of trees.
Yeah.
In residential areas.
Mhm.
Really make sure that we have lots of trees already.
Yeah.
And of course, we know that trees are also good for the environment. But they can shade sections of roofs and that. So when you call a company and they come out to the house and give you an estimate and everything else, are they also taking into consideration the environment of where the home is located and making suggestions on that? Or are they just want to sell us?
Yeah. Good
There's a lot to
question.
take into
Totally. Yeah. So the question is, when you're looking to install solar, you call a company over, do they take a look at, the tree cover and the environmental impacts of that when you're installing solar, or do they just want to sell you? It depends on who you get. So we have a program, which I'll get into in just a minute, where we provide advice to residents to install solar. And a lot of times I've gotten emails from people saying, hey, my contractor says I can install this if I cut down that big oak tree. It is, if you own it, and it is your tree, it is your decision. We recommend against it because there is, environmental benefits to keeping trees as well, right? So, perhaps there's a compromise. We can trim the tree, or somebody can trim the tree so that tree is still healthy, still provides, benefit to the environment. But you can also install solar. And in some cases, for example, we've installed systems where we've only done half the roof because we've done an analysis and there was so much shade on the one side, they didn't want to cut the tree down. And so they compromised with that. So it's really, I would say though, at the end of the day, it is the decision of the owner of that tree. Contractors, I would say in most cases, are going to tell you to cut it down so they can sell you some more panels. Yeah, which is unfortunate, but that's the reality of it. So. Then there's DC optimizers, which is kind of a compromise of the two. So everyone says, oh my God, solar, Nova Scotia, that's crazy. Not a chance, right? We get winters like this. Yes, we do get winters like that. But when you look at the potential solar radiation year round, we actually have more potential than Germany. And I always refer to Germany because Germany is eons ahead of us in renewable energy. So if it's good enough for Germany, it's good enough for us. So solar, residential solar itself, the capacity of installed solar has increased exponentially since 2016 when our program started. Not all of these installs have been through the Solar City program, but you can see, solar installations are increasing exponentially, and it's due to a couple of things. One is, and this is to your point, we have actually a really good program with the government and Nova Scotia Power called the Self-Generation Program. So the way that program works is you're going to install solar on your roof. In the summer, it's going to over generate. You're not going to need it for heat. You're not going to need the electricity for anything like that. You're actually going to send it out to the grid. You use the grid as your backup battery. So people say, I want to have battery storage. Well, that costs a lot of money. It's dirty. There's some funny rules around it anyway. You use the grid as your backup. And then when you need that electricity in the evening or in the winter, you're going to then take it back, and it is at a 1-to-1 credit ratio. So that's the most important piece. When I overgenerate in the summer, and I love it, it's great. I get my bill at the end of the month. I see a credit at the bottom of my bill, and it is at the same value that I would have paid Nova Scotia Power for. So when those rates go up, which sucks for everyone, is good for people with solar because your payback actually got a little bit better. The only downside, and I don't consider this a downside, but other people do, is at the end of the calendar year, if you are still in a surplus, then you actually lose those credits. So that is unfortunate, but the program is designed so that I am net zero for myself, right? I've offset all my energy consumption. In a lot of cases, you can't fit more panels on your roof to overgenerate and make money off of Nova Scotia Power. And, what I would say to people who, really do not like that is, essentially if Nova Scotia Power has to pay you for it, you have to be a business. You better get different insurance. I hope you do your taxes properly. It is what it is. The end goal is for you to be self-sufficient in offsetting your electricity consumption so that you do not have to pay Nova Scotia Power anymore. There's also incentives. So through the province, and Brendan, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I think we're doing good. Through the province, there's a $3,000 incentive through the Solar Homes program. It is 30 cents per watt. Like I said, these panels have typically each panel is about 500 watts. Typical system is 10,000 watts or 10 kilowatts. Any normal size system is going to max out that $3,000, so you don't have to worry about the math. The federal government has a Greener Homes loan, so it's $40,000 interest free. I'll get into the cost of the systems in just a moment, but that should cover the cost of the system, interest free over 10 years. And then the federal government there's rumblings that they don't anymore, a $5,000 Greener Homes grant. Over the weekend, I heard that they might be getting rid of that, which is kind of a step backwards, unfortunately. So that kind of sucks. But we also have the Solar City program, which is the program that we run at the Halifax Regional Municipality. We've been running it since 2012. So it's been but it's been 10 years. And what we do is we offer guidance and unbiased advice to residents that want to install solar. As you mentioned, there's contractors just trying to sell, There are good contractors too, but there's about 70 contractors out there. And there's a handful of them that are just itching to sell. So we don't care who you go with. We just want to make sure that you get a system that meets the needs of you. We answer all of your questions. So my colleague, Chris Bernard, he's the dude on the phone, and he's always ready to have a chit chat and walk you through the process. We also offer financing. 4.75%, which is not as good as the federal one. You can use us as bridge financing, and it's for 10 years. So if you're ineligible for the federal program for whatever reason, there is no eligibility requirements for ours, except that your property taxes are up to date and paid in full. Since the program launched, we had 2.0 launched in 2016. We financed about $22 million in projects, saving residents about $1.6 million in annual utility savings. When people are on the fence and they say, oh boy, I want solar, but I'm not really sure, it's an investment. It is an investment. The average cost after taxes and before rebates is about $28,500. So it is, it's an investment. But when I talk to people, I say, it's a long-term investment, paying mortgage for electricity or paying rent for electricity, right? Every year we pay for electricity and it goes nowhere, right? It's similar to paying rent, right? You're not putting equity into your pocket. You're not paying off something. So I try and get people to think about installing solar is like getting a mortgage for your electricity, right? Over time, estimated payback of 11 years, you're going to have that solar off free and clear. It's sticking around until, at least for the next 14 years and then some, and your investment is quite a wicked payback. So a 25-year return on investment, we're estimating about over 200%, and that is at utility rates increasing modestly around 2.5%. Last year the rates went up 7%. They're going up again another 7%. So you kind of take that as you can take that and do your own analysis on that. Another metric that I like to share with people is a levelized cost of electricity. So that levelized cost of electricity is like you are essentially purchasing 25 years of electricity today, right? So people that purchase the system today, 28.5, essentially locking in your utility cost at 16 cents per kilowatt hour. Today, we pay about 17 cents per kilowatt hour. So as those rates go up, you're still locked in at 16 cents. You're laughing. You're having a grand old time. Any questions on solar? I feel like that was more exciting than my doom and gloom climate stuff. Yeah, Chris.
We did the Solar City program a number of years ago,
Mhm.
and I think at the time that only did solar.
That's right. Yeah.
You could talk about the evolution of that.
Totally. Yeah. So the question was from Chris. He and his family went through the Solar City program back when we only promoted solar hot water heating systems. So we just wanted to know, how did we evolve from that to where the program is today? So Chris is right. In 2012 to 2013, 2013 to 2015, we had the Solar City program. It worked essentially the same way, but we encourage people to get solar hot water heating systems. So solar hot water heating systems, it's probably one or two of these size panels. It's much smaller, and it preheats your domestic hot water. So it essentially offsets the need for electricity or oil to heat your hot water. That program was called the Solar City Pilot Program. We installed about 400 solar hot water heating systems over those 2 years. In 2015, we stopped that, and then we reevaluated. Okay, was this a success? Was this not a success? It was deemed a success. It was before my time getting to Halifax. But what they said was they opted to expand the program to include all solar technologies. Right. So we had sort of defined that solar hot water was the best bang for your buck. But by 2015, the cost of solar electric had come down quite a bit. So we wanted to leave it up to the market and let residents decide, what is the best option for them. We also changed, we opened it up to the market. So for the pilot program, we contracted one solar company to do all the installations, and we got a lot of negative feedback, as you can imagine, from all the other solar companies. I think it was a great idea, though, because it made it easy for residents to trust. It's been vetted by, trust the government, but it's been vetted by the municipality. For one solar contractor, it's essentially a one-stop shop, similar to that Navigator program that I talked about earlier. Trust one person. Now it's open to the market, which can make it a little bit more difficult for residents to navigate, all the different quotes, all the different technologies. So that's where we provide that guidance and unbiased advice as well. In 2016, that's when we launched Pilot 2.0 or version 2.0. And I'd say about 99% of the installations have been solar electric, just because the cost is so low and because it's so versatile. With solar hot water, unfortunately for Chris, if he does not use the energy that is generated, he can't send it to the grid. He can't do anything with it because it's just hot water, right? So he has to make people take showers and, invite the neighbors over or something. I don't know. You get teenagers, so you probably get all your money's worth, which is great. Good. But, if you're, living alone or it's just, you know, you and your partner, this system will still produce throughout the summer. You'll get compensated for, you know, for what you don't use in the summer, because you'll use it up in the winter, unless Chris has like a huge tank to save that energy. Not to crap on your system, I'm sorry, but yeah, we've just made the program more flexible. And then version 3.0 is going to be the navigator, where we're going to open it to all deep energy retrofit. So it's not just solar anymore. We realize we're kind of going the wrong way. Solar is great, but we really should reduce our energy consumption first. And then I'm not going to talk about electrifying transportation because Brendan's going to talk about it. And I think we're going to take a break. 10-minute break. Awesome. And I'll be around if anyone has any questions.
Oh, yes. Hello, everyone. Sounds good on the microphone for the virtuals. Awesome. I can hear myself there, a little reverb. My name's Brendan. I work for NextRide. So that's a group within the Clean Foundation. So that may be a recognizable name for some in the room. The Clean Foundation's been around since the late 80s, and it's evolved quite a bit. One of the projects that has evolved from that organization is what Evan and I work for. Evan's my coworker in the back. So NextRide started in 2019. We are similar to what Kevin was talking about, sort of an unbiased or as least biased as a person can be, advice for Nova Scotians paid for by taxpayers like you and I. So it's a provincially funded program. And we travel the province in electric cars, fully electrics these days, and let Nova Scotians actually try the technology themselves without the need for sales pressure. So without the dealership experience. It also affords us a little bit more flexibility in the cars that we can bring to events. And we usually do about 90 to 100 events a year. So we're pretty busy between travel time and that's quite a bit of road time as well. So we've definitely pushed the technology quite a bit. We're not easy on those cars, and I'm excited to tell you a little bit more about them as we go through. Similar to Kevin, just raise your hand, give a holler. I'll repeat the question, or the microphone will come along. So I won't wait for anybody to stop me. You'll have to grab my attention. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to take about 45 minutes, I think, is what is agreed on. There's time for test drives at the end. We brought a Chevrolet product today, so you can try a fully electric Chevrolet Bolt. You just need to see my coworker in the back. Awesome. Okay, let's proceed. Am I pressing the right spot? Okay, so here's what we're going to cover today. So what is an electric car? So we're going to talk about exactly what we mean when we say that, because when I say electric vehicle, sometimes it means different things to different people. So we'll cover that. Why somebody would want to go electric. So what are some of the benefits? So what are some of the environmental benefits? What are some of the charging considerations? It's a big barrier to some people, is where do I charge this thing? It's different than gassing up a car. So we'll talk all about those differences and some of HRM's stuff that they're working on as well. They're cooking up in the kitchen. And then if there's time, I'll cover a little bit of bonus material, which I like to call sort of the future crystal balling sort of stuff, where our team thinks the industry is going. If my voice is a little off, pardon me, I have a little bit of a cold today, so I'm going to try and stay in the back from you guys as well. What is an electric vehicle? So what do I mean by that? What does our program mean by that? There we go. So to start things off, I like to talk about the more familiar platform, which is a hybrid car. So technically this is an type of electric vehicle, but it's actually one that we don't cover very much at our job, at our NextRide job. It's a little bit better understood by Nova Scotians for one. So the need for a team to go out to do communities like Parsborough or Amherst or Yarmouth or some of these more distant communities, not so high. But as good as these platforms can be, there's a little bit more carbon abatement that can happen on some of the other cars that we're going to talk about more today. So the hybrid has an internal combustion engine. That's what this acronym means here. So you've got a car engine in the front. It's either gas, usually, or diesel. You've got some regenerative braking. If you're not familiar with that is, it just means that when you slow the car down, some of that force is turning a generator on board, just like a wind turbine does. And it creates electricity that way, and it slows the car down without necessarily using your brakes all the time, which is nice. Saves your brakes, charges the battery a little bit. Then it's got the electric motor. That's what uses the power on board, the electricity on board. On a typical hybrid, like a Prius car, this is usually a little bit of a weaker motor, so it's not going to support all your driving. Most people know that the gas engine will kick on at some point during their drive. And then you've got a tinier set of batteries on the bottom of this car. Usually about a sixth of what we're talking about in a fully electric car. So kind of not as powerful as some people would like to believe. Then you've got either gas or diesel for your fuel. So you'd fuel this up at a gas station just like any other car. The next one that we like to talk about, coming along kind of the spectrum of electrification, is what the industry calls it, is a plug-in. Key to this is it has a plug. So most of the cars we're going to talk about today have plugs, or I'm comparing it to a gas car. A plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, often confused with a hybrid because the automotive industry loves to pull fast ones on people and name things super similarly, is that it plugs in, but it also has a bigger set of batteries, and also the motor is stronger. And what that means is that you can do up to highway driving on a plug-in hybrid electric car. That's very rare that you'll be driving in a hybrid doing highway speeds. It's very rare. You'd be going downhill almost exclusively. So if you get up in the Highlands somewhere at Cape Breton, maybe your hybrid will run just on battery mode coming down. The plug-in electric allows you to charge at a wall outlet or a station that you might have seen around, little 240 volt stations. Those type of chargers mean that you can start your day with a full battery, whereas the hybrid car at the end of the day is still gas dependent. You still need to gas it up somewhere, and you don't start your day with a full battery. The engine has to either charge the battery or your braking has to charge the battery. Okay, a couple key differences there. And you can see the internal combustion engine's a little smaller. Typically, we're talking about a 2.1 or a 2.4 liter engine. These are very small engines, very compact. Oftentimes, these cars for daily driving come with enough batteries to do all of it. And then your highway trips, then you'll switch to gas when you go further than, say, 60 kilometers or something like this. Some of the technology's gotten that far now. So these can be great for folks who know a lot of their driving 9 times out of 10, 7 times out of 10 kind of stuff are within kind of 40 to 60 kilometers or less, because most of that, if not all of it, would just be on the batteries. Okay, very efficient. Yes, of course.
Hybrid electric vehicle. And,
great.
I never had thought of it, but if we're away for 3 weeks and we just park it,
yep.
Any problem with the battery?
So no, there shouldn't be any problem. The question was, we've got a hybrid electric car, and we park it for 3 weeks. We go on a trip or something like this and we don't use it. Is there a problem for the battery? So which battery would be my first sort of thought? The accessory battery, your 12 volt battery that you'll usually find in the front of a car, like to get boosted. That would be of more concern for me. So getting somebody to drive it after about 8 weeks is usually what the industry will talk about. So if you're not gone for that length of time, you should be fine. Yep, no problem. To expand that on the rest of the batteries that are actually driving the car, not the 12 volt batteries, it's the same type of device. Typically what we'll tell people is charge it if you're going to be gone for 2 months or something like this, charge it to about 50% and then leave it. That's kind of the best way to leave it shelf stable, shall we say. Yep. And then the fully electrics. So this is what our team is most familiar with. It's where the industry is placing a lot of its marketing emphasis for sure. And it's the most different for Nova Scotians. So it's usually what comes up in conversation with us the most. We can certainly talk about the plug-in hybrids. The most of my presentation is geared around the fully electrics. It's also where a lot of governments and eco sort of groups are sort of focusing their emphasis as well. For those that it works for really well. And the lion's share of the benefits of electrification we can find on this side of it. So we'll be talking about that more. We don't find an internal combustion engine in this car. It's not there. It's a fully electric car. And then also the regenerative braking on it is very sufficient. So it's very powerful. It's very strong. So if you go on a test drive with us or ask Kevin about his fully electric transit van that the city owns, they would tell you, or you'd find out for yourself as you drive, that the car is able to brake almost fully, or on most cases these days, fully on its own. So it's very rare that a fully electric driver will touch the brakes in a day. Once you get used to them and things like that, it's a little bit different. After a couple of days of driving, you too would be able to go throughout all your day without touching your brakes. It has a very strong electric motor. So this gentleman here was chatting up Evan and I a few moments ago before we began, and was just saying he's seen a lot of fully electrics take off from a red light to a green light quite quickly. So they are very torquey. A little bit of a heads up for when you're doing our test drive. Do just watch out. I like to just mention that at this point, and again, before we start the driving. The batteries are significant on these. Some people have concerns from a mining perspective or recycling perspective, what goes into these batteries. I'm not familiar. We'll chat about that closer to the end of the presentation, so I will cover that. But the batteries on these, like I said, they're usually about 6 times the power of what we see in a typical hybrid. It's quite a bit. It's about 60 kilowatt hours battery, if not more on the SUVs. So it's pretty significant. Okay, there's also some micro-mobility options out there that are coming up more and more. We've all seen those scooters that are kind of just heaved into a corner of our city. I'd like to say that's a problem with the user, not the technology. So I like to see a lot of these scooters. I just wish we'd find a good way to manage and educate people not to do that, or better kickstands if they're falling over or whatever it is. But these are great. I ride the next micro-mobility option quite a bit for work. So if you ask me what my favorite electric vehicle is, I'll remind you that we're supposed to be unbiased. And then I'll quickly answer, it's an electric bike that I ride the most, that I like. So for your shorter commutes, your medium commutes, an electric bike with a battery on it these days can easily do 50 kilometers just on the battery without you pedaling at all. And then if you're pedaling along with that drive, they can do 75 kilometers, 200 kilometers of distance before they give out. And there's some longer range batteries out there now where they'll put 2 batteries on, and they'll just add more battery to it. And then you can go quite a ways on the trails or do all your transiting that way. So they're great for fitness and electric, which is a good mix. And now we're starting to see electric trucks as well. So it's not just your little town cars, as some folks say. Now we're starting to get into, okay, this vehicle can haul, it can do some work, and certainly they're definitely torquey enough, but do they have the batteries, and is there enough charging to support that kind of work? And that's kind of where the industry is now, is figuring out, okay, how do we charge these safely and fastly and put all those stations in the right spots for cheap? So why would a Nova Scotian be interested in hearing what NextRide has to say, or why would they be researching an electric car of some type at all? Well, there's lower maintenance, due in part to how few moving parts there are in these cars. That's a big part of why there's lower maintenance on them. When I go to transportation classes in schools, or when I go to NSCC and I chat with the automotive groups, or I go to public works divisions in towns or the province, and I'll ask them, how many moving parts do you think is in a fully gas car? And I'll ask the audience here and the folks on chat to type into the chat, and for you guys just to holler out, or maybe not holler, but say, verbalize, how many moving parts do we think there are in an engine? If we were to tear it all down and look at a schematic and try to rebuild it, how many parts would we be looking at? It's a good question that not a lot of Nova Scotians know the answer to. How about I'll do it like a bit of a bidder. How many think that there's 100 moving parts in their car? No takers for 100, one taker for 100. How about 200 moving parts in an engine? Yeah, okay, 200. How about 300? Any going for 300? Kevin says 300. How about 500? I'm going to start doubling it. How about 1,000? Okay, how about more than 1,000? Okay. Well, it might shock you actually that when we actually do start breaking down an engine, Red Seals will tell you there's about 2,000 when we start counting the ball bearing. Everything that needs lubricant, that's moving, that's having wear and tear, there's friction, there's heat loss. It's a lot of moving parts. Some of these are quite durable. Keep in mind, a ball bearing is a pretty durable piece, but it's moving, requires lubrication, has a chance of failure. There's about 40 moving parts in most of the fully electric cars that we look at. In the one we brought today, I believe there's 23. So when we talk about moving parts to make this car go, and we talk about lower maintenance, we really mean lower maintenance. This is a huge factor difference. It also helps in that torquey takeoff that we talked about. When you have fewer less parts in between, that all take a little chunk of energy each time there's a joint or something moving. This is direct power with the electric. These are all the parts that you'll never find. If you get quoted anything at the mechanic shop for this on your fully electric, find a new mechanic. All right, you won't find these here. So save that list. I hope you guys took a video. Okay. Energy consumption. This is why governments are crazy for these. In addition to the pollution reduction, and in addition to some of these other benefits and the noise reduction and this kind of stuff. If I could show a curious politician why they should be interested in electric cars, and I only had 1 or 2 slides, I think this would be in the running for being in that slide. 1 liter of gas is equivalent to about 9 kilowatt hours of electricity. So just keep that in the back of your mind. It's not important that you know what a kilowatt is. We have a rough sense of what a liter of gas is. It would be a little bit more than what's in my water bottle here, right? So this much energy in liquid fuel is worth that much of electricity. And when we compare prices, pardon me, I didn't adjust this. This would be closer today. It would be about 159, I think it is right now for gas. But it fluctuates all the time, and I don't always have the time to change it. So here's our red car. Red car goes faster, we tell ourselves. Here's a gas car. It's traveling on 1 liter of gas. If we just put in a liter, here's how far it would go. This is the Canadian average efficiency right now in our nation. Okay, so it's going to travel about 11 kilometers just over on a liter of gas. When we look at the electric car, you can tell because it's got that fun plug. I swear they don't always stick up like the antennae when you're driving them. Over here, we've got nearly 5 times the distance. So when we talk about energy sovereignty, when we talk about the insecurity of a commodity-based transportation system, we need oil and gas, we bring it in, we ship it in Nova Scotia. We don't consume a lot of transportation fuel from Alberta or any of these other regions in Canada. It's mostly shipped in from Saudi sweet, European, or Texas crude that we shipped from Alberta. There's a lot of things that can happen in between us shipping it to Texas to ship up to us that we don't always have the same issues with electricity. We can create it on our roof and put it right into our cars. So the raw efficiency of these cars to be able to take just a little bit of energy and move it really far is great. So that's very important. Safety, incredibly important. So, oops, there we go. There's a lower risk of fire in these cars. If you go on Facebook or if you Google it, and if you go on CBC or some other headlines, you will think the opposite. But by the numbers, when you look at electric cars and you look at gas cars and you say, okay, how many have caught on fire? How many have firefighters responded to? Those numbers are recorded. And it's actually not the electric car, and it's not the electric car by a wide margin. So we're looking at about 7 electric cars per 100,000 on the road today that have caught fire. Partially because there tend to be newer cars. There's older gas cars out there than there are electric cars. So keep that in mind. I do expect over the next decade that this number will increase some, but also the batteries keep getting safer as well. And I don't expect it to tie the gas cars at all, no matter the age of the electric. Don't freak out about your hybrid, seeing the bar graph there, please. This is 3,500 out of 100,000 is still not a terrible number. And it's because the early hybrids had an issue with how many batteries and the feeding of the electricity to those batteries, so that complex interplay was still being worked out on those. In fact, a lot of the hybrid fires happen in the wiring, and it's usually a minor fire. So I hope that reassures you. So that's fires on electric cars. That includes crashes, by the way. That's not just sitting in a garage somewhere. Okay. And these are global stats. Okay. From a safety perspective, my brother was in a rollover. There's also a lower center of gravity on these cars. So I like to tease him that he wouldn't have woken up upside down if he was in a fully electric car, potentially. The lower center of gravity on these cars is important for traction control. So they're very hard to roll these over. You can see in the crash safety study site, they're trying to roll it over to get an assessment of how much force is needed. And it's very difficult because the batteries weigh so much. You wouldn't put them on the top of the car, you'd put them on the bottom. And so they're all down in there. And it helps to center the car, just like the keel of a ship. Okay. This is my #1 issue with the industry right now. It's called winter range loss. So when somebody asks me, what should I be watching out for? What should I be concerned with as a Canadian? It should be, it's not battery fires, or it's not the overall range of the car or anything like this. It's actually the range of the car when it's cold out. It's that difference that you need to watch out for. Some people buy some of the older fully electric cars just enough to do their daily commuting, and then, oh, but the weather changes and you didn't plan for that. So it can be a little tricky sometimes. So I'm here to tell you what it looks like. So as temperatures decrease, as they go down, sorry, I'm in your way. As they go down below zero, around freezing point, we start to see a pretty significant drop in the range of these cars. What do I mean by significant? Well, it varies quite a bit, but by about 10%. That's pretty industry normal. So if you buy a car and it can go 400 kilometers on a nice summer day at 20 degrees, expect that it's going to go about 10% less than that in, it's going to lose about 40 kilometers in freezing weather. Luckily for Nova Scotia, not only do we have great solar potential, as Kevin mentioned, but we also have fairly mild winters. Not for global standards, but when we look at the rest of Canada, certainly we are a luckier province from that perspective. We don't see -40 or 50 like some of the prairies do. My brother, actually, he'll be the punching bag for this presentation. He's out in Edmonton, and he gets all the cold weather you could ask for and more. The cars work there. They just lose a lot of range. Funny enough, they're the only vehicles that don't have to be plugged in to start, which is kind of a funny turn of phrase. On the extreme side of things, the 10% is not usually what catches people or makes them not go with a fully electric car. It's the really cold temperatures that make them worry a little bit more. It's the -15s and 20s that we get, 15, 20 times a year that we should be more concerned about. That can actually change our driving, daily driving habits. For most people, a 10% loss, who cares, right? I'm not driving 360 kilometers today. Who cares, right? But if you lose a third of that range, and now you're only driving 300 or 250 on that same battery, now it could matter. If I'm going to Yarmouth today, that's going to play into things, right? I need to know about that. So it's a thing, I'm telling you, so now you know about it. And also, there's heat pumps in the cars, some of them. So just like you can have a mini split on your house, you can have the same kind of heating system in your car. Our Chevrolet Bolt does not have one. It's a way to keep the cost of the model down. But as Chevrolet and others look at this more and electrify more of their cars, their newer platforms, they're looking at putting these in. So it's a thing that's relatively new, about 2015, 2016, they started doing this. And some groups have done it ever since. The heat pumps can help reduce the winter cold, and it's a nice space-saving feature because it's also your AC in the summer. So it's a 2-for-1 deal where automakers now have 2 systems put into one, where before they had to pay for 2. And you guys had to pay for 2 as a consumer. The other car that we usually have at our events, it's over at Burnside today for another event with some of my other coworkers. That one has a heat pump that we'd like to show people. So it is a thing that you can test drive. Just look us up, nextride.com. Balanced traction. I already talked about the rollover risks and how resilient these cars are to it, how they can resist rolling over. There's also quite a bit of balanced traction in the car. You'll feel that today if you go out on a test drive, or if you talk to anyone who owns a fully electric car. The weight of the battery is significant. There's no way around that. When you're looking at a Tesla Model 3, their sedan, it's about 300 pounds more than a gas car the same size, right? So it's like having 2 or 3 people in the car driving along with you. And if you're driving a long time, you'll get a sense of that difference in weight. Some of the cars, some of the trucks, for example, are getting up in the 600 pounds more than an equivalent gas truck. So it can be significant. What that means for traction, though, is that you are really stuck to the pavement pretty darn well. As soon as you start deaccelerating, slowing that car down, you can really start to feel the grip difference. My old boss, and this is not why he's my old boss, but he used to be a track drive racer kind of advisor for one of the automakers. They'd take like luxury VIPs into Daytona and all that stuff and do all this stuff. And he borrows some of those skills sometimes when he's looking at these cars, and he really likes the performance of some of these cars. And so he assures me, although I don't push it to the envelope, sometimes he's gone on some licensed tracks and actually tested it to its fullest, and he assures us it's pretty good traction.
Looking at the electric vehicles, and I know that you purchase either just the regular, or there's the 4-wheel drive, or I don't know what. But so people have said you don't really need to spend it because it's an extra battery or something.
Extra motor.
Or motor.
Yep.
Have that.
Yep.
So people just generally who don't know anything more than I do said, "Oh, I don't think you need it," but are they right?
It depends. So partially yes, and partially no. So it all depends. At the end of the day, it's what you're comfortable with. So the question was, do you need all-wheel drive if there's better traction and more weight in the car? Sometimes no. So it depends what you're driving is really what I'd get somebody to look at when they're trying to decide between, do I pay the extra for the all-wheel drive, or do I just stick with a front or rear-wheel drive? Even in these cars, it's becoming rear-wheel driven predominant. Yeah. So they'll put an extra motor in the front to give you traction on both axles. And then that's how you get your all-wheel drive. 4-wheel drive's a little different. There's debates in garage shops, will be till the end of time, about which is better, but suffice to say, it's not 4-wheel drive, that would be 4 motors, which now it's getting expensive. But it depends on your driving. So if you've got a very steep, let's call it gravel, or very slippery driveway that you go in 5 times a day and out of 5 times a day, and you live like in North Mountain or something like this, and it's icy all the time, go for the all-wheel drive. But if you're just your everyday consumer driving around here somewhere in Nova Scotia, I would say your rear-wheel drive or your front wheel is sufficient. I've taken the Chevy Bolt in we're an all-season program. I haven't pushed it on the racetrack, but I've certainly gone through some snowstorms in it, and I'm perfectly fine in it, perfectly comfortable. Yes?
Some of these vehicles typically front-wheel drive.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so it depends if they're front wheel or rear wheel drive was the question. So the defining factor, how you'll know, is if the car was built and designed to be a fully electric car from the onset, it's going to be rear wheel drive start. I can't think of an exception to the rule here in North America. And then they'll add in a front motor if you pay the extra for the all-wheel drive. But rear wheel, because of the weight difference, you want all the weight in your back foot if you're taken off from the starting line. And these vehicles have a lot of torque. So if you do push it, you don't want to be fishtailing. On the front wheel drives, what we see is these are your gas platforms first. And then they decided, instead of redesigning everything, we can convert a few off the assembly line at the last steps to be a fully electric car. So they'll drop and that's what our Chevrolet Bolt is actually. So you can see outside today what it looks like. You can pop the hood, and where an engine should be, there's motor and electrical components. Yep. And this is probably the other slide that I would leave for when I mentioned if I go to a politician, I only had 2 slides that I had to show in like a 2-minute period or something like this because they're busy. I would show them this slide and then the efficiency slide. This slide here is really cool because I have it here in print form as well, actually. That's why it's so cool. There you go. I take no liability for paper cuts. Gotcha. So this is comparing a gas car to a fully electric car. So it makes it really easy when we look at cars made by the same groups. So Hyundai makes both cars. They also make a plug-in hybrid of this vehicle, and a hybrid actually. So they kind of have every type of drivetrain you could ever imagine in this Kona. And what we see is this is a 5-year study here in Canada, and it did not include the Nova Scotian rebate, which I'll talk more about in a minute, that stacks on top of the federal rebate. So we actually get 3,000 less than this number. So it should be around 46,000. Okay. So what do we see on this graph? Well, the retail price of a gas Kona, very popular car, small SUV, is about 26 grand. This was 2021 numbers, about 26 grand. So why would a Nova Scotian be interested in paying nearly twice that, 60, 70% more on the retail of a car for a fully electric? That's a lot of money. Why would I do that? Well, it's like Kevin was mentioning about the solar. It's a bit of an investment in your transportation. It's sort of a mortgage for your transportation versus what we see on the gas side. All those benefits that I talked about, the less maintenance, the efficiency, so I can take a little bit, pay for a little bit of energy and go further. That all happens on the fully electric side. And it brings these costs way down. So yeah, your initial cost is nearly 46 grand, but over 5 years, you're actually paying more if you calculate all your gas, your insurance, your maintenance, significantly so. It's very rare that I see or have somebody send to me a report that says that the gas comes out on top in 5 years. When we talk about 8 years of ownership, 10 years of ownership, we expect these vehicles to go about 22 years before the battery is no longer good for its use. And then it goes into something like storage power or something like that. So it's not that at 6 years, the battery fails and I'm just not showing you that stat. It's that as these cars age, we're going to get even better numbers on this and they'll continue to prove themselves. Questions about that? Okay. Yes, great. Yep. Correct. We hope. As homeowners, we hope. And that's where the similarity to his example with solar and housing probably ends, because a lot of cars are not going to resell for a huge amount. Right now is a bit of a unique time in history. Normally, a car is a cost, not necessarily something you're going to recoup. Today is a bit of a flash in the pan in the last 3 years due to supply chain issues from COVID. We don't anticipate those to continue in the automotive industry for forever. It might be another year or two before that kind of straightens itself out. So no, it'll never truly pay for itself in that sense. From the resale value, there is depreciation. I agree with you on that. Some people say, watch out for the depreciation on these cars because the batteries are improving every year. Who wants to buy, yesterday's news, all this stuff? I would say there's plenty of eager people looking for used electric cars. Especially as the price continues to come down in the industry, and that it's an important piece of the equity pie as well to get into that part of it. And there was one other piece I wanted to say on that. It'll come back to me in a minute. We got some thumbs up from the crowd. Awesome. Okay, I mentioned rebates a couple times. So we offer rebates here in Nova Scotia. I shouldn't say we. There are rebates offered in Nova Scotia. So if you go out today, you said, Brendan was such a charming, handsome, well-spoken young man. He sold me on the concept. I've got all the money laid out. I had in a suitcase and I'm ready to throw it at a dealership. They would take your money, I'm sure. And they would give you an $8,000 rebate off of a fully electric car or a plug-in hybrid car that can do 50 kilometers or more on its battery before it needed to kick the engine on. That's the federal kind of milestone needed to get that rebate. We stack on top of that. Here at the Clean Foundation, we give out another $3,000 in addition to that money. So they give 5, we give 3, and it means the dealerships can tack off $8,000 on the price. So if you sign up for a lease or purchase new, you'll get all that money. If you sign up for a used car and buy a used car from a dealership, you'll get either 2,000 or 1,000 from Nova Scotia. There's no federal appetite. I've tweeted or X'd at our Prime Minister as much as possible. He hasn't responded to me yet, so I'm pretty sure he blocked me, but there's no appetite for federal used money for the used cars. But there's 8,000 available for the purchase or lease of a new one. There's also charging station rebates now. Our team, Julia back at the office, gives out 50% of total cost of installation for organizations, not for individuals, unfortunately. So if you know anybody who's in the business world, any municipalities, First Nations groups, libraries, things like this, do let them know. EV Boost is the name of that program, or just Google Clean Foundation. You can find it that way. We also have rebates for the micro mobility that I showed. It's a $500 off the purchase of an e-bike. That's pretty great because the e-bikes these days usually run between $1,200 to $2,200 for most of the bikes that we see come through the program. Some nice ones are about $3,000. Cool. Environmental benefits. How am I doing on time? Did I hit yes on my? I didn't even start my timer. Genius. I'm sure we're doing good. 5 minutes? Okay. So when we talk about our grid, where does our grid come from? Or sorry, where does our grid come from? Where does the carbon emissions from our grid come from? I think the clicker's given up the ghost. There we go. Oh, there we go. Yeah, it's giving me a red light here too. Well, we've got power generation and we've got transportation. You want to grab me the mouse that we brought? Thanks. So I'm in a pretty fortunate job position because I get to try and reduce both the power generation and the transportation emissions. So I'm in a pretty lucky job myself for that. How I do that is by encouraging Nova Scotians like yourself to get into a fully electric car. They take very little energy to go very far, like I said. And when you compare it to a gas car, they don't pollute nearly as much, largely because of that efficiency, but also because you're pushing the energy generation all the way up to the grid. They're more policed than we are. How many of us, including myself, have driven with a check engine light or a warning, right? Or a low fluids, or skipped an oil check, right? Or like my brother's car back in Edmonton had a catalytic converter stolen from it, right? So that didn't always used to be a part of the car. They put that on for pollution control, and it's an expensive piece, right? That can sometimes get stolen away. And can you go next slide for me while we're just figuring out that? Thanks. But that was a Canadian pie chart. So what does it mean for Nova Scotians to plug in a fully electric car and compare it to a gas car? Well, this is what our grid looked like in 2005. And then again in 2018, a little bit more recent. So you can see a big change on coal in particular, and you can see the emergence of wind in particular, that yellow pie. Then we move into coal and pet coke. Oh, just go back for me one more second. Thank you. I know I've only got a little bit of time left. Hydro and tidal is another big piece that we anticipate to take a lot of the brunt of the energy demand. It's nice because it's a base load. You don't have to have the sun shining or the wind blowing. It's nice because it's a base load. So we anticipate that to make up a large margin of it. Muskrat Falls is where a lot of that's going to come from. Okay, and click once more and stop there. Thanks. Some folks say, okay, well, what about the battery? And what about my gas car? Surely it can't be that bad over a couple of years. Come on. It's got a catalytic converter on it. It wasn't stolen or anything like that. So is it really that bad? Here's an 8-year study when we look at the cars and compare them side by side. So we say a small electric car similar to like a Chevrolet Bolt that we brought today, and a small gas car similar to like a Honda Civic or a Toyota Camry, something like this. So the car production, here's the global emissions. This is a global average. Here's the emissions, roughly speaking, to, thank you so much. Whoa, you guys charged that up really fast. Rubbed their hands together on the static and jolted it in there. So a small gas car compared to that. So this is the steel that goes into it, the aluminum that goes into it, the catalytic converter that goes into it, and also the seating and all the plastics that go into a car. Here's roughly the global average emissions, CO2 equivalent, for putting in the batteries on your typical car like a Chevrolet Bolt. So it's significant, right? You just doubled the car's auto manufacturing emissions. Wow. How can that ever make itself back up, right? But you'll notice the scale of my chart, we're not done. So the next one, here's the fuel production. So when we talk about going to get the coal that gets fed into Nova Scotia Power's grid that feeds this car, well, there it is there. That's the go getting the coal. I have to dig that out of the ground. Here's the I got to go get the stuff out of the ground for the gas car, right? Shipping it around the world and all this stuff, processing it. Here's the actual running of a fully electric car here in Nova Scotia. So we redid the numbers from this 8-year study to be Nova Scotian. And what we found is it's pretty significant. On a 52% coal-based grid and 15%, I believe it is, nat gas and bunker C fuel, that's what it looks like there. But take that Honda Civic or Camry, make it as efficient, darn near as efficient as possible. Those are pretty fuel efficient cars, nearly twice what we see on that side of it. So day one, when you purchase a fully electric car, it is true. It's almost always going to be dirtier from an emission standpoint to create that car, right? That light blue part, what I mentioned, to create that fully electric car than a gas car. But as soon as you start driving that gas car, which is why you bought it, it starts to even out pretty darn quick, and it changes to this pretty darn quick. How many of us have seen an 8-year-old car, right? Lots of them on the road, right? They're around. What's the average lifetime of a car? What's the disposal things for the cars? The average lifetime of a gas car is just over 300,000 kilometers. So if you've got an odometer past that, congratulations. But this is the average. 240 is when people I notice start to get a little sweaty. Then we look at the expected lifespan of the batteries. We're comfortable telling Nova Scotians, expect 600,000. So when we talk again about the retail price of the car being 60 or 70% more, sometimes double what the gas kind of comparable is, I would also sort of mention to them, yeah, but we expect the battery to last twice as long. So it kind of makes sense. It's a more expensive product. So you're not probably going to have to run out and buy 2 gas cars. You can just stay on 1 fully electric or plug-in hybrid. Charging, I'll cover that quickly, and then we'll move into our test drive phase. Level 1, 2, and 3. We get 3 levels of charging, different than gassing up your car. When you're gassing up your car, it's all just 1 speed, unless you got a jerry can and you're kind of squeezing the tube of it and slowing it down. It's all 1 speed, right? And it's measured by Measurements Canada, actually. Level 1 on a fully electric car is plugging into a wall outlet. It's very slow, as you can see. On a fully electric, you can expect about 8 kilometers per hour that you've left it plugged in. So I wouldn't recommend going to Shell or Irving or anything like that and plugging in and then sitting there and wondering why it's not done yet after 5 minutes, because it's a wall outlet. It's the same thing that charges our cell phone, right? Overnight though, not to underestimate it, I've done entire test drive events where the motel level 2 wasn't available or wasn't there or it didn't have one yet. And I've charged on a wall outlet and then done all of our test drives the next day, 10, 12 test drives, it's fine. And then had enough charge to go to an actual station and charge up. So if you're just bopping around town, sure, you could get away with a level 1, a wall outlet, great. For condominiums and apartment dwellers, this is way cheaper to put in 10 or 20, 100 of these in a parking garage or something like that than it would be to put in the same number of level 2s. Much easier on the panel as well, what feeds those circuits. Level 2s, though, are a little bit more exciting as we move up the power. These are usually the same type of plug types that a dryer would go into or an oven, some of the bigger electrical demands in our housing. A level 2 is similar to that in its draw. So when you're charging the car, it's kind of like you're running the dishwasher or your oven. So it can be a higher amperage demand, and then it's going to add more charge to the car as well. Some of them now have moved up to about 80 kilometers per hour for a high-end car and a high-end charger. So it's definitely moving much closer to refueling in a few hours. And level 3, the most exciting, I'll say, of the charging experiences can typically go anywhere between 250 kilometers to 1,000 kilometers in recharging. So some of the modern cars now and modern stations, when you pair them together, you're getting about an 18-minute charge to go from 10 to 80%, and then you're back out on the road. So a sub 20 is typically where people say, okay, that's acceptable. And it's not that different than spending the North American average of 15 minutes at a gas station. So we're getting very close to parity. This is Nova Scotia. You've seen it before, I'm sure. This is 53 chargers in Nova Scotia. We've got 8 coming from HRM next year. Yeah. And then we've got another 8 after that. Following year, Kevin, working on it. And then we've got 16, 24, 24 more Tesla only chargers happening in Nova Scotia as well. They're happening down the coast here, 6 in Digby, 6 in Yarmouth, and 8 in just outside of New Glasgow. And then we've got a bunch of everybody can charge at these light blue pins that we can see there. The dark blues are pretty universal, but it's kind of like Apple and Android. So it's not that easy all the time for somebody, if they bought an electric car and they didn't do very much research or didn't talk to someone like me, to figure this stuff out. So that's why we like to mention Tesla's only charge at Tesla stations. You have to buy an adapter. A Tesla person has to buy an adapter to use anyone else's stations, okay? Once they buy that adapter, they're good to go. They can use anyone's stations, but they need that adapter first. We've gotten too many panicked phone calls and emails for me not to say that in our presentation. And this is the part where this is the bonus material. So we've reached that part where I'd like to invite you again. Evan is our sign-up person today. He's going to go out on a test drive. We've got 1 car today, which means 3 of you can go at a time. So I recommend potting together with your friends or your enemies and signing up and going out for a test drive with Evan. The test drive will be a short circuit today where we just have the 1 car and we're kind of strapped for staff. And then Kevin as well can field questions about just about anything under the sun. But he's also got a transit van, fully electric. So for any of your contractor friends that you're talking about with the solar groups, you can fire back to them and say, hey, have I got the van for you? It'll really help you sell some panels as you show up on a fully sun-powered car. Questions at this time before we break and move into the test drive phase? I'll be sticking around as well to answer questions. I'll be back at the booth after this. Yeah. We'll start here and then we'll move down this way.
Talk about rollover safety,
Yep.
fire safety, crash safety. That is
Yeah, great. So probably the sexiest of the safeties, that wham, right? That you see in the videos, the slow-mo videos, the crash dummies. So from a crash safety perspective, generally because they don't have anything in the front of significance, like an engine block, like you said, a hot engine block, typically what we see is the fully electric cars will win the #1 spot on the podium for crash safety from a rollover perspective, from a traction perspective, like a moose test, and then lastly from a front-on collision as well. Yeah, so it follows the same trend. In your gas engines, what we see, Subaru made a big marketing push on this, and I think did a great job in the engineering. They have that drop engine. They put a lot of effort into having a crash safety from the front on, where the engine block goes down and out away from the occupants of the vehicle. And that's a big deal. So they won a lot of awards from a safety perspective on that. For the folks who are still driving the old buggies with the engine in the back, I don't know what the front end collision safety standards of that right now, but that's been a few decades that hasn't been in style. They had air intake issues. Next question.
How much does it cost to charge your vehicle?
Great question. Yeah, it can typically range. It's usually about $10 or $14 in between there to charge your fully electric car. So the energy savings on that graphic that I was passing around are just minuscule. It's one of the largest savings. It usually vies. It usually trades places back and forth with maintenance savings for your best savings. So to charge an electric car like that, $10 for 400 kilometers is incredible. It would be like paying like 25 cents or 30 cents for a liter of gas, to put it in gas terms. Yeah, imagine seeing that on the Ultramar sign, right? So sorry, that answer to the question was, for the virtuals is, how much does it cost to charge the fully electric cars? In Nova Scotia, we pay the highest utility rates. It's about 10 to 14.
So with the.
Yes, and this is captured in the maintenance data. I went through to make sure in that study that they did factor that in. So it would be like driving with 2 additional people in the car all the time, right? So yes, it does, but more than more than the weight of the car, it's the torque of the car, and it's where this is a newer technology, typically people who look like me or older, and then usually of the white collar variety. And they like to show off to some of their friends that also like fast cars. So what I tell people with tire wear is just drive like you would a gas car and don't show off to your buddies, and it'll be okay. What we've seen on our vehicles, we have a full electric fleet except for 1 truck now at Clean. We've seen no additional tire switches yet. We've been doing it for 3 years full, so we're happy with that. Mm-hmm. Correct. Yep, you'll hear how quiet they are outside. It's very quiet. We've all, I think, at this point, heard hybrid cars when they're just in parking lots going really slow, and you'll hear almost like a false humming, like a hum, 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 hum. That is just to let people know, to stop texting in the parking lot when they're crossing or something like that. If they listen, is up to them, but it's to let you know that there's something there and approaching. Yeah. So the question was around noise. I'll get used to this here at the end. The question is about noise. Yes, fully electric cars or plug-in hybrids when they're operating on battery are very quiet. Noise Pollution Health Canada is trying to pin a number on. They've been asked multiple times over multiple governments, figure out a number for this. What is the number of damage? What's the impact to our economy by having noise pollution? It's very tricky to figure out, and it depends on which professionals you consult and all this stuff. I won't do their job for them, but essentially what they've said is the number is difficult, ranges wildly between this large number and this large number in financial costs annually. And so if we can cut that down, especially in our urban centers, we would see potentially a large reduction in that cost as well. Yeah, industrial equipment too, things like farming equipment, construction equipment, things that we wouldn't typically think of an electric car doing, are also becoming electrified. The largest mining truck in the world right now is electric, fully electric. So their torque has always been known. It's been the batteries that have caught up finally in the last 5 years. Yep. We expect the batteries to go about 600,000 kilometers in use before their decay, their degradation is enough that it's, okay, let's get that off. That's not that usable anymore. At which point, we're going to reuse them in wind or solar or on the side of people's homes for battery backups. Yep. So about 22 years of average driving is the other number I could tell you. That's a lowball number. Dalhousie researchers would say, try 6 million kilometers. I'll wait to see it, but they're way smarter than I am. I'm sure they're right, but I'll wait the 600 to see, and then I'll be a really old person and I'll be able to tell you, I was right. Yeah. I'll be very old. Yeah. Graphite, lithium, these kind of things. There's cobalt-free batteries now, which is very exciting. There have been for 3 or 4 years. It's a very dubious and shady sort of supply network where about 73% of global cobalt was coming from the DRC, some of which was not government controlled or licensed. So there was a lot of child mining concerns and these kind of things, right? To switch from oil and gas, which also has its own underbelly that we don't want to see all that often. We don't want to just trade off one devil for another, right? So how do we make sure that what we're buying is actually ethically sound, right? Or reasonably sound? Now there's cobalt-free batteries. They're pretty exciting. They're called LFPs. It stands for lithium iron phosphate. batteries. So it just means they put more iron in the recipe when they're cooking it up. Yeah, but from the mining perspective, it doesn't keep me up at night. We continue to find more reserves the more we look for them, which is kind of funny to say. We still have unexplored nooks and crannies. Case in point, over the last 4 months, we've found, like I'm out there doing this, there have been people who have discovered lithium veins in Maine, which are enormous. And that's a hard rock, though. They found a very easy to access old volcano in Nevada that has allegedly as much lithium as all of the salt flats in South America put together. So that's very significant. And the majority of our lithium right now comes from Australia. Yeah. So some people worry about the China competition thing. They're actually holding on to their lithium, which we used to thought was very smart in the long play. We're now actually wondering if that's the case. Yeah.
There's a question from the chat. Could you repeat the question? Do all electric vehicles now lack a space to store a spare tire?
It's an interesting question for sure. They're not with us to see where a spare tire might fit. So the question was, do electric vehicles have a space for spare tires? So electric vehicles will often have more usable space than a gas car because of the parts reduction that we talked about already. It allows engineers, much smarter people than me, to rearrange the car and make it work. Spare tires are not as popular as they have been in the past, even for gas cars. We're starting to see them kind of go in popularity. It's an added weight and cost in a world where gas cars are being told you have to compete, especially against things like the electric car, on efficiency. So we're starting to see automakers rely on those less. I'm sure they'd like to sell them. I'm sure they make money at the dealership level and at the automaker level, but tire technology has also improved over the last few years, where popping tires isn't as common. Run flats are now a thing as well. And instead of spare tires, what we'll find in most cars these days is a seal kit. So you'll get a little CO2 capsule, and it's a little pump that you just puncture a little cylinder of air, and it just fills the tire back up. And then there's usually a glue or an adhesive in that same cylinder. And so it's called Tire Slime, is a brand of it, and it fills the gap like glue would, and there's your temporary tire until you get it fixed. Yep. Much less weight and space needed for that than a spare tire. Any takers for test drives? Pretty exciting car out there, Chevrolet Bolt. Most affordable in Canada. Got a couple there? Yeah. See Evan back there. He's waiting. We don't get commission, so that's about as exciting as it gets. That's our sale, so to speak. Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Brendan. I'm just going to say a few thank yous for the duration of the course on behalf of Ecology Action Center. First of all, to all our diverse and fascinating speakers, such as Brendan and Kevin, both of whom did a fantastic job today. And also our partners at ZAP Architecture, Efficiency Nova Scotia, Affordable Energy Coalition. It was great for us to be able to bring various experts on various subject matters. And hopefully it gives you a sense not only of their specific areas, but also how complicated this whole energy transition is. It's a big change, and it requires everyone to be involved in many different ways. And I want to thank you all for being here week after week and for taking an interest, and also SCANS just for being SCANS. I think it's such a fantastic offering. This is the second time I've been involved with teaching a SCANS course, and both times I've been so impressed by them. Their level of organization is such a wonderful thing to offer. My mother is a loyal member who loves to go to these classes as well. And as you know, a retired person, to do the lifelong learning and remain an active citizen. And last but not at all least, perhaps most, I want to thank Efficiency Nova Scotia, because they are our sponsor. They for this program. We did this as part of our Culture of Efficiency program. and public education is part of that. So thank you to them for both providing expertise and also funding the whole shebang. And if you are interested in staying abreast of new developments and new things in energy efficiency post this course, if you go to ecologyaction.ca, you can sign up for the Culture of Efficiency newsletter, which is a monthly newsletter with all kinds of interesting updates on policy, on new technologies, on new education opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a good way to keep up to speed on what's going on. So thank you all so much. It's been a wonderful experience for me, and I hope you've learned as much as I have from this. So thank you so much.